say, what's the question of the day? I'm Professor Q. So glad to be with you. The question is, what type of tree needs fire to reproduce? Wow, that is out of this world type of question. Go ahead at this time and try to think about the answer to that question. Hi there. Well, we have our special guest who seems to be a regular guest these days. This is Twinkles. Say hello, Twinkles. Hello, that's right. So, did you figure out what type of tree needed to be under fire to be able to survive? Can you believe it is going to be the great sequoia tree? This tree can actually, that's right, this is not a tree, but it is a grain. But this tree can actually grow up to 300 feet tall. Whoa! That'll be a long climb up that tree, right? Absolutely. But these massive trees, though, need intense fire in order for their cones to be able to release the seeds and reproduction occur. Isn't that amazing? So what happens is that fire, when it goes through the forest area of the sequoias, that it helps to be able to, one, create space for trees to start to grow, helps to be able to clear out all of the leaves and the rummage that's on the floor, and as I mentioned earlier, helps that for their cones to be able to start and release those seeds. So when those seeds fall to the ground, they fall to a fertile soil that will be provided with the snow during the time of winter, the nutrients and the water. So when springtime springs up, that seed gets to germinate. Can you imagine that? Wow! So I wonder, how else does fire positively affect Mother Nature and its inhabitants? So let's talk a little bit today about those inhabitants, shall we? Well, earlier we discussed about food chains. And what were the components of a food chain? Correct. You needed the primary source of energy. You needed also a producer. And then you needed a consumer. She didn't know that she's a consumer. But that's correct. Yes, you are a consumer, and a very good one at that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to mish and mash those different types of food chains, perhaps in one environment, ecosystem. And what happens is that it becomes known as a food web. What does it become? A food web. So I want you, as we're starting to think out aloud here, of some particular organisms that are in the ocean, that are in the desert, and then also in the forest. Once again, that's the ocean, the desert, and the forest. So let's go ahead and actually create a type of food web, because as it was so important for those particular arrows to be pointing the right direction, the food web needs the appropriate direction as well. So remember that the energy and what's that percentage rule? 10%, correct. 10% needs to flow. So let's discuss about our energy pyramid. What was that first level? It was the producers. Well, let's take a look at what we have here. We do have some producers. We have the grass. We have some berries. We have carrots, yum, yum. And then we also have grains, like you see over here on our table. So with this is our first level. So who in all of this mix mash of particular organisms do you think will eat any of these four producers? Correct. The bunny. The bunny will actually eat, well, what will that bunny eat? That bunny will munch on its carrots. We always see that, correct? But can a bunny also eat grass? It sure can. Oh no, what do we do? It eats two different things. No worries, you got this, because we're going to use two arrows. Now, the question I have is, which way should the arrows be? Should it be from the producer to the consumer, or from the consumer to the producer? Remember, what did you do in food chains? That's right. That the arrow should be from the producer to the consumer, because the carrot's going into the bunny's stomach, and so is that the grass goes into the bunny's stomach. Now I got a question. Do bunnies eat berries? Let's pause and do some research. Okay, so let's get right to it, shall we? So we have our producers that are here, and let's discuss about our solar energy. So the solar energy is going to provide energy to its producers, of course, correct? So that's why you have these arrows going in that type of direction overall. And so now who's going to consume these producers? Well, of course, we have a mouse and we have a rabbit. Do they both consume the producers? You bet, because remember, I asked, well, does a rabbit eat berries? Well, in the wild, yes they do, absolutely. So let's go ahead and fix our arrows in the appropriate direction. Should the arrows come up from the berries, the producers to the consumers? Or the consumers to the producers? Remember our energy pyramid? You're right. So our arrows should actually go from the producer to that of the consumer. And this would actually be the primary consumer of the producers. So is there any organism then that perchance would eat, or unfortunately consume, a mouse and or a rabbit? Well, of these that are here, yes there is. It's that wolf, that pesky little wolf. Well, which way should we have the arrow pointing? Should the arrow be from the wolf to the rabbit, or from the rabbit to the wolf? Correct. It should be the rabbit to the wolf, because the rabbit is going into the tum-tum of the wolf. Absolutely, yes. Now, let's also take a look at this particular organism called the grasshopper. Now, does a grasshopper eat any of these particular types of organisms, of producers? Well, yeah, it sure does. For our purpose today, we'll make it, of course, eat the grass, but it does consume and nibble a little bit on the others as well. Absolutely. And is there anything, though, that would eat, as I had mentioned before, perhaps the mouse? Yes, the snake consumes the mouse. Do you observe how the direction of flow of arrows are moving? Now, what else will the snake eat? Will it eat a lizard? Will it eat a wolf? Well, unless it's an anaconda, but for right now, a regular snake's just going to keep to itself. But the question is, do you think a wolf, if it's really, really hungry, would eat a snake? I don't see why not. So what we're going to do is we'll say, well, the snake needs to go into the tum-tum of the wolf. So we're going to have the arrow going that direction. Okay? You're doing great. Keep it up so far. Next, is there any other organism then that the snake could consume? Well, what do you think, Twinkles? Did you see anything here that it could consume? Oh, you're kind of eyeing that lizard, aren't you? Because you like to, that's your food chain for you, isn't it? Thank you for helping us out. You're right. The snake can actually consume a lizard. So the lizard's going to go into the tum-tum of the snake. So we will make that arrow go appropriately. And what about this particular owl? Hoot, hoot, the wisest of owls of all. Will an owl consume a snake? Yes, it sure will. So therefore the snake goes into the tum-tum of the owl. And so we have over here, of course, this little bird. Well, where should this little bird go? Well, will the bird eat a wolf? That would be a sight to see, wouldn't it? But could a bird eat a lizard? Yes, it could. Absolutely. It could definitely eat a lizard. So let's go ahead and make this appropriately. So the lizard goes into the tum-tum of the bird. Correct? Correct. Now, could a bird eat anything else that would maybe happen to be viewed here? There's one organism that I see. Correct. The grasshopper. So for our purposes right now, why don't we go ahead and just kind of do this. Now the grasshopper is going to go into the tum-tum of the bird, correct? So let me just have a couple of arrows so that way it is representational of where it should be. Now, in reality, this should be one long drawn out arrow from the grasshopper to that of the bird. Okay, now, grand scheme of things, this is a lot of information, and do you see how important it is to ensure that you have your arrows flowing appropriately? Yes, absolutely, sirree. So, with that being said, you have done a fabulous job, and thank you, Twinkles, too, for helping out me and you learn a little bit more about food webs. Because the question is this: what do you think would happen if one of these organisms were to become extinct? Oh my goodness, what impact would that have on the food web? Right now, go ahead and brainstorm in your journal what you think would happen. Okay, so huge impact that if one organism is extinct from the food web, how does that reverberate throughout the remainder? So let's say for example, if we were to happen to take away, let's say this little rabbit unfortunately ran away and never came back to play and is no longer a part of the food web, what impact does that have on the remainder of these particular organisms? Well, what does it directly impact? Well, remember that the rabbit was directly connected to the wolf. So therefore, what would happen to the food source of the wolf? Well, we know that the rabbit would no longer be on the buffet list. So what would happen? What's next? Well, does a wolf still have the ability to choose another item? Of course. The wolf does at least have a snake that is directly located to it, so it could go after snakes and it would still be able to survive. But let's say what would happen, let's say, to the grasshopper. If the grasshopper no longer was in existence and it just hopped away, what organism would that impact? Would that population increase or decrease? Well, remember that the grasshopper was connected to the bird in this food web, and the only other connection, of course, was to the producers. So if the grasshopper is not going to consume any of the producers, what would happen to the producers? Would they increase or decrease? They would increase. But then what would happen to the bird? Does the bird have any other consumption item that it could eat to survive and reproduce? Yes, it does. And what is that? It's the lizards. So do you think the lizard population would decrease or increase in this food web? More than likely, it may decrease because it's the only food source in this food web that that bird would go after. So those little lizards would be scurrying around all over the place. Hopefully that they would actually be a chameleon. Anyway, so with that, that's why it's so important to see how the impact is and the interdependence. Say that one more time. Interdependence. Lean on me when you're not strong. I love that song. So that's right. Each organism depends on one another for survivability. And if something happens, if fire occurs, if flood may happen, if disease or even famine and war by any means occurs, or what about deforestation, then the habitat is directly impacted and the interdependence is shuffled so much that therefore the food web starts to disconnect. So that's why it's so important for us to keep all intact and to help our species survive as they should. So, once again, do you think of any ocean organisms? The fish, the whales, the seals per se, or the little penguins, oh my. And how could that be created? So what I'd like for you to do is on your journal, in your journal, please write down the word ocean. List at least 5, how many? 5 organisms that live within that ocean environment. Try to create a food chain with those 5, and then try to list 10 other total organisms and try to make a food web out of it. And do the same thing, 5 organisms for the desert, for your food chain, and 5 plus 5, so you have 10 organisms in for a food web. And then for the forest, you'll have 5 organisms for your food chain and total 10 organisms for your food web. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you, Twinkles, for showing up as well. So, remember, be strong and good, better, best. Never let it rest till the good gets better and the better gets best.